Everybody here this morning. Got a good crowd with us. We got some cold weather again, and I don't know about you, but I was kind of hoping that it would stay away, and nonetheless, it's found us again. I guess we got a few more weeks of that, and we'll be good. I will say this, just kind of, as far as I am concerned, I get a lot of questions, and I don't want to, I kind of just use this time to answer everybody so you kind of know what's going on. But I'm hoping that we can just take me off the prayer list in about a month. I went into my most recent visit and got to take my boot off. The screw that is going, I've got a screw going completely through my ankle that they've got to take out. And I have already bent it. So they said that they're probably going to take it out in another month. They'd normally like to wait till 6, but they said 3 is going to have to do. So, but I'm healing up just fine, and so hopefully that won't be a big deal. But I'll be able to come off that prayer list really soon. We've got a lot of people on that prayer list that we need to be thinking about, and I'm just thankful that. We have such avenues as we do, having the PowerPoint up there to be able to look at these people every Sunday and see their names and remember them in our prayers. Remember them throughout the week, though, and we'll be much better off for that. I wanted to bring up something. I actually was thinking about this the other day. I have not heard a specific lesson over the lesson I'm going to do this morning. I assure you someone has somewhere. I just haven't heard it. I've used verses to go and talk about things in association with the topic we're going to discuss this morning, but I'm not sure that I've heard a dedicated lesson to this. And so when I find out I haven't heard a dedicated lesson to this, when I think about it, I go, I've not heard that. That's my cue to preach on it. And so I am going to, this morning, give you 5 kinds of fools in the Bible. Yeah, not April Fool's Day, right? But, we are going to talk about 5 different kinds of fools. I remember growing up, my grandmother would say this a lot. And a lot to me because I deserved it, but I would do something and I was not using the full capacity of my brain, and my grandmother would say, you need to quit that foolishness right now. Whatever I was doing, just quit that foolishness right now. I'm sure my mom probably said that to me at some point in time. Maybe you have had that same thing said. Now, when it comes to being foolish, that does not mean that you are an unintelligent person. I think sometimes we think of it like that. I mean, what does it mean to play the fool? When you think about that, playing the fool, that's, the theatrical thought of you're playing somebody who is not intelligent. Now, there are fools that would be those that would perform in courts as a jester. That's the thought process. But when you think about a fool in the Bible, what does that indicate? There are things that we do that are foolish, and yet it doesn't mean that we are not intelligent people. I want to give you 3 short stories, things that you'll know, and just prove this very fact. Have you ever built a ship before? Actually knew somebody who did. It's a small boat. But I've never done that. I've looked into how intricate this can be, but I've never done that. I've never built one. You think about the Titanic, though, and you go, well, that's a tragedy. Someone who knew how to build a boat, and they built this boat, and then, it sank, right? And there are things that go along with that. Very smart men. There was some very new technology going on at the time. They had these rivets that they put into the side of the boat. Really, really strong, really durable. Only problem is that when they met frigid temperatures, they would not hold up. Well, how do you know? They didn't really know until they met. There's other things involved there. They thought that the ship was an unsinkable ship. And so, well, what do you do when it comes to an unsinkable ship? You don't put life vests for everybody. You don't put the boats out there, for everybody. Just enough to make it look good, right? Well, we know the end of that story, right? And so, these were smart people, very smart people, and yet they did some foolish things, and I guess, something that we often don't talk about is they knew icebergs were out there, and they didn't slow down. I'm just telling you, there's a lot of foolish things that happen. Let me give you another story. You remember this one. This one happened before my recollection, but I knew it fairly well. And in 1986, there was the Challenger explosion. Maybe you remember that. What was going on? Very smart people. I've never launched a rocket. Of course, I get a kick over Mike's stories, where Mike Snyder launching his own rocket with his own fuel that he made, and the military found out, and they said, stop that. That's pretty hilarious. I'm not that smart. I know that that's intelligence. But, what do? These people, brilliant scientists, right? But they had some detailed warnings, and they were warned that there was some trouble with the O-rings, and if it was colder that morning, that they didn't need to launch because, well, if it was within a certain range, then the O-rings would have some troubles, and well, we know that 73 seconds after launch, exactly that trouble happened, and all of those people were taken in that crash, that explosion. Think about this one. This one we don't bring up a lot, but I remember this one fairly well. You remember Enron? What happened with Enron? There's all these very smart people making very foolish decisions. I mean, these are Ivy League people that understand things, and they make some foolish decisions. See, I wanted to just illustrate this very quickly, that you can be a very intelligent person and still do foolish things, right? And so we are all susceptible to this, and we need to be very careful. And so I'm going to give you 5 different kinds of fools that are referenced in the Scriptures. Number 1 is this. This comes from Proverbs 14. If you want to stick in the Proverbs, that's where we're going to stay most of the time. Proverbs 14 and verse 15, if you want to look that up. Proverbs 14 and verse 15. The simple believeth every word, but the prudent man looketh well to his going. There is what is called a simple fool. That is, that he is very gullible, swept up in trends, easily convinced of things. And this is a problem, right? You have probably talked to somebody that they believed everything that they read, right? Everything that they see, everything that they hear, and it just may not be true, right? You're going to find out that there are certain sources that are really good sources, and there are sources that are really bad sources. I remember, I don't even know if they still do this, but I remember growing up and my grandparents got this, and this was the most mind-boggling thing. But you remember the National Enquirer? What was always on the National Enquirer? Like the front of it always had some bizarre thing. Man giving birth to twins, like just ridiculous things. And so they would have all of this stuff going on in the National Enquirer. And, there were people that would just pick that up and be like, Did you see what was in there? Like that, legitimately, they have found this, whatever it is. You know what? Loch Ness Monster, done, solved. They caught him. They caught him. They released them, don't worry. But they caught him. And so, like that's the kind of stuff you would see in there. And you know what people would do? And be like, oh man, this is amazing stuff. Yeah. There are some times that people get things wrong, right? Or something is too fantastic and it doesn't live up to the hype. But this idea of being a simple fool, you know what? There is a danger here. Now, this is the danger when it comes to Christians, is that if you fall into this, then when every little doctrine comes up that's new, which, by the way, when you hear something new, you automatically should just kind of, that should set your radar off a little bit, because there's nothing new under the sun, especially if a preacher were to get up and say, hey, I'm gonna tell you something new today. Guess what? The Bible, in its completed form, is 2,000 years old, right? There's not a lot new to that, right? And so you can't come up with something new. You might find something you've never seen before, but it's not new. And so if someone says, hey, I got this new thing when it comes to the Bible, that should alert you. But there are people that will go, oh yeah, here, I've never preached on this. Maybe I should. I've never preached on this, but I've been shocked at how many brethren have gotten caught up in this new heavens and new earth stuff. Have you heard this? New heavens and new earth, Jehovah's Witnesses have been teaching this forever. And that is that, what we are living here. And this new earth, this new heaven, this is it. This world is going to be reformed, if you will, or restored, or whatever. There's all kinds of terms they use. And, basically, heaven's going to be right here is the thought process. I'm sorry. There's a whole lot I've got problems with on that one. And yet I've seen so many brethren that have just been swept up into it, and I've thought, this has been around for a while, then someone starts teaching it in the church, and then they just start eating it up, and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, Jesus already said, I'm going to go and prepare a place for you, and then I'm going to come back and bring you unto myself. That does it. That does it right there. And yet some people have just been swept into this. That is the simple foolishness that we're talking about, being naive. And that happens a lot, right? Being swept away by every wind of doctrine. That is having a lack of depth. When it comes to stuff in life, we kind of realize this, has a reporter ever written a story and lied about something in order to just get some readers, right? We have a term online now for some of this stuff, and it's called clickbait. They tell you, hey, this is a story, and they tell you something fantastic, and it's on this headline, and then you click into it, and it's like nothing. It didn't live up to the hype, right? And so, but they got you to click on it. It's clickbait. And so people will lie in order to get you to consume whatever they want to sell you. And so we got to be careful about this stuff. All right, number 2 is this. Look at Proverbs 12 and verse 15. Proverbs 12 and verse 15. I mean, listen, we could one after another. If you were to just, and you can do this on your own, go home sometime, pull up on, if you've got a Bible program like eSword or something like that, go and search for fool and foolishness and all that stuff in the Bible, and you're going to have a plethora of verses. So many that we're not going to put them in one lesson. We've had to pick and choose here. And so Proverbs 12, verse 15, if you actually just read through the Proverbs, you're going to find multiple occasions in most of the time, in just like one chapter, you have multiple occasions, just like in chapter 12, where it talks about foolishness. But the way of the fool is right in his own eyes, verse 15. But he that is wise hearkeneth unto counsel. So you've got, here is what is called a stubborn fool. You've got a stubborn fool. That is someone who thinks that they're right, and if you tell them that they're wrong, what are they going to do? Nope. I've been doing this a long time. There is no way anybody's found a better way to do this. I know better. And so that's the stubborn fool. Thinks that he is right all of the time. Resents correction. That's kind of when you start thinking about foolishness. When you resent correction, that's a problem. That's when you realize, that's when at least you should realize that maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Because if you resent correction, it really, what that means in your mind is you're accepting that you're what? You're accepting the fact that you're wrong about something. And so if you are resenting correction, you're saying, I'm wrong, but you don't want to be wrong. You're stubborn, right? If you're a stubborn fool, you go, I'm not wrong, I am right, and so you don't want any correction. Let me ask you this. I have done a whole lot of building of things over time, and there were some things where I watched somebody do this, and has anybody, raise your hand if you've ever done sheetrock at all. I mean, even for an hour. Have you ever done sheetrock? Okay, so I got to tell you this story because this is what I saw. Someone told me that when doing sheetrock, they were using a saw. I mean, like an electric saw. And I was like, okay, I'd never seen it done before. So whenever I did it on my own, I got out a saw and I was cutting these things. Now, if you have done sheetrock even for a minute and you've done it the right way, you know that that's exactly the wrong way. Do you want to know what happens when you get a circular saw onto some sheetrock? The dustiest mess that you have ever been in your life, that's what happens. I'm pretty sure that I had formed concrete in my lungs after doing this for a day. And then I did all this, and then I watched someone, this is kind of a little bit before YouTube got popular. I started watching this later. I was like, man, that was terrible. I was like, and I've seen people do it, they are doing different things. And so I went and I looked, and I was like, oh, that's a whole lot easier. You just take a knife and you score it and you break it, and it's not a big deal, right? A whole lot less dust, mind you. A whole lot less mess, right? Guess what? The first way that I did it was what? Foolish, right? The way that you see it done the right way ends up being the smart way. It's the wise way. Now, what if someone came to me and said, Matt, you're doing that the wrong way. And I said, you know what? Hey, you don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do this the way I want to. I'm going to do this my way. Well, you know what? I could do it my way, but it's the foolish way. There's a lot of people who will not accept correction, but the scariest part of that is when it comes to spiritual things. Now, see what happens to the stubborn fool when it comes to spiritual things. Well, I'm right? That's the mentality. I'm right. I'm not wrong. And so when correction comes, what do? Hey, you don't tell me what to do. You don't tell me. You'll have people say all kinds of things. I've said them here that people have said to me. I'll preach a lesson and then someone will say, you know what, I got boots older than you. I've been a Christian longer than you've been alive. There's like a number of these that I've heard over time. Well, you know what, that's okay. Can you learn something? If you are, when you're 10, can you learn something new when you're 10? you know? When you're 15, can you learn something new? You think you can't learn anything new, but when you're 15, you can learn something new. What about when you're 20? What about when you're 25? What about when you're 40? What about when you're 50? What about when you're 60? You know what? If you aren't learning something new all of the time, you're probably inept. You probably are not very intelligent if you are not learning something new all the time. Because, listen, we can all learn something. I've oftentimes said, I can learn so much from the dumbest person in the room. You can learn from people. You can learn from everybody. When you think that you've got it all together, no, that's where you start having to really consider, am I a stubborn fool? Stubborn fools just will not listen to correction. Number 3. This is one that I think you'll probably understand. There is a different type of fool here. In Proverbs 21 and verse 24, it says this: "The proud and haughty man, scoffer is his name. He worketh in the arrogance of pride." Guess what? There's another type of fool here, and that is you've got the scorner, or you've got the mocking fool. You know, I guess I'll tell this. I know I've told this before, at least to somebody here, but whenever I was years ago, I was in preaching school. When you're in preaching school, you have to, you'll preach all the time. You know, you're not preaching full time, but there's always somebody looking. You might even go to a congregation that wants you to preach every Sunday. But even at that, you'll have congregations that just call the school and say, hey, we need a preacher for this Sunday. Can anybody come? And then they'll go and they'll talk to the students, and somebody will go. And I can't remember how this worked out, but I ended up going to, I always call it Podunk, Louisiana. I don't know where I was. It was probably Podunk, though. But anyway, we were in Podunk, Louisiana. There's a Podunk everywhere, by the way. There's a Podunk, Oklahoma. There's a Podunk, New York, okay? There's Podunk everywhere. I was in Podunk, Louisiana, and they had one traffic light and a hotel and a McDonald's. That's what they had, you know. So anyway, this is the nearest town to this place where I was going to go preach. And we go into this McDonald's. We are dressed up in suits and ties, just me and this other guy. And we go in, and immediately someone starts making fun of us. Now, they don't think that we can hear, but we can hear. And they're acting like, it's very strange for 2 people to come in dressed in suits on a Sunday morning. And, of course, in my mind, where does your mind go on that one? My mind would immediately go, hey, they're going to go to worship. They're dressed up. It's Sunday morning. They're going to go to worship. That's not what their mind went to immediately. We were homosexuals for some reason. And so they started in on that, and they made fun of us for quite a while, and we never said anything to them. We just listened, and we're like, wow, this is crazy. And but the best part of that was their mom called during, I guess it was mom or grandma, called while they were eating, and they were like, yeah, we'll be at services. And I'm like, please be at the same place I'm going to be. I can't wait. This will be the best sermon ever. I'm looking forward to it, but they didn't. But that is what happens with the scorner. The scorner is mocking, and the mocking fool makes fun of people. It makes fun of all kinds of things. It makes fun of righteousness. Some people will be like, well, living together before you're married, that is old-fashioned. Oh, don't worry about that. That's old-fashioned. That's nothing. There's some sin involved there, right? Or, you look at all these different things, hey, when it comes to the transgender stuff, I've heard people say this, and I've actually had someone say this to me once, and they they're talking about transgender stuff with me, and I would tell them, well, yeah, that's wrong. The Bible talks about, and they go, well, what year is it? Huh? And if anybody ever, let me give you the answer for this. If anybody goes, well, what year is it? Like, come on, aren't you? You're behind the times. Let me give you the answer. You just ask them another question. What does that have to do with anything? What year is it? Oh, well, we've progressed so much. What does the Bible say? The Bible is eternal, right? You're not getting rid of that thing. That is the Word of God. We're going to be judged by that. So if we are going to be considering anything, it's not the current trend, because, the current trend is going to go away and it's going to be something else later on, right? And so this mocking fool is going to look at anything that's righteous that they don't want to do, and then they'll go, that's ridiculous. They ridicule serious things, they undermine leadership, and they spread their mockery around with other people. All right, number 4. We don't use this term a lot, but there is what we would call a brutish fool. I've got a couple of passages for this one. If you want to, Psalm 92. Psalm 92 and verse 6. If you don't want to turn over there, you want to hang right at Proverbs 12, I'm going to go there next. But Psalm 92 and verse 6. A brutish man knoweth not, neither doth the fool understand this. Now, lack of understanding here is the key. Look at chapter 12, verse 1 of Proverbs. Whoso loveth correction loveth knowledge, but he that hateth reproof is brutish. What does it mean to be brutish? Of course, if you think about it, you've heard women called men in books and movies, and they'll say, he's just a brute. And what we think about that is, maybe we're thinking about someone who's big and strong, but maybe they're not so bright, when it comes to... But the idea is really something more animalistic. That is that they are living on instinct. They are sensual. They lack spiritual perception. They are just like an animal. That's the thought, right? There's a big difference between people and animals. I know, people are obsessed with their animals. I get it. Some people are like, they'll have a dog, and then they're like, that's my fur baby right there, If that's you, I'm not making fun of you a whole lot, okay? Maybe slightly. But when you think about that, we do tend to get attached to animals, right? You get a dog, and you're like, that's my baby, but it's not really a baby, right? It's a dog. A big difference between animals and humans is that we have a greater range of knowledge and a better understanding of companionship, right? Do dogs marry? No. You can put two together and let them mate. You can do that. But that would not be their mate for life. Men and women are made differently. We're supposed to find a mate for life. But animals don't do that. Animals just fulfill whatever desire that they have. And so that is someone that is brutish. It doesn't mean that they're violent. It doesn't mean anything other than the fact that they eat, sleep, and seek comfort in whatever way that is. That is somebody who is brutish. They are not spiritually minded at all. And so, someone who is a brutish fool will do a lot of different things. In Psalm 73, verse 22, it says, so brutish was I and ignorant, I was as a beast before thee. See the psalmist showing, I was like an animal. But this kind of fool has no hunger for depth, feels little conviction, and is spiritually numb. Now, when you think about that, poses a big problem for people in the church, right? If you are brutish, then you think not spiritually at all. Now, how are you going to get past that? You've got to get deeper into God's Word. All right, number 5. This is the last one. In Proverbs Psalm 14. Psalm 14 and verse 1. I always appreciate this passage. But the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. I want to point a few things out. This verse has really solidified this in my mind. I've been thinking about this for a while, and then this verse I think really brings it home because it says really the same thing. Now, I had heard all these debates that happen between atheists and Christians, and when you look at that, it looks like, there are a lot of people that just don't believe in God. I don't think that's actually true. I think there's a lot of people who hate God and say, I don't believe in God, but really it is that they hate God, because you'll see in these different debates when the thought of morality is brought up to them, they will say, I wouldn't do that. And if they were asked, hey, do you believe in God? If you believe in God, if you were to believe in God, would you follow Him? And they'd say no. Doesn't make any sense, right? And so, what is it that they would do? They really all they do is they hate God, and then they say in their heart, there's no God. It's not that they really truly don't believe in God, it's that they convince themselves there's no God. That's all there is to it. And so the fool hath said in his heart there is no God. The classic story I think is pretty interesting. You've got this atheist that goes before the court and says, hey, I want a holiday for atheists, right? I want a holiday for atheists, Christians, they have all these observances that they do. You've got all these observances for different groups of people in the United States, and yet there is nothing for the atheist. And the judge responded, yes, there is. It's April 1st, because the fool hath said in his heart there is no God. And it's true. If you look around, it doesn't take much to see that there is a higher being. God is all-knowing, but this corrupt fool says, nope, there is no God. This is similar to what you see with Nabal. This is that kind of a fool. There's no true atheism. I don't believe that at all. There is no true atheism. And at the very least, if you're wondering about that, one day you're going to know, right? After death, you are going to know. There is going to be a day when everybody will know. But this corrupt fool goes around and lives as if God does not see, lives as if God will not judge, and lives as if God does not care. And so, we've named off 5 different things here. You've got, 5 different characteristics. One that is naive, one that's stubborn, one that is a mocker, one that is basically dull, and then one that is corrupt. And when you think about all these things, we need to think about what the Scriptures teach. And the answer to all this is very simple. You don't want to be a fool, right? Nobody wants to be a fool. In Proverbs 1 and verse 7, the fear of Jehovah is the beginning of knowledge, but the foolish despise wisdom and instruction. And so, brethren, be wise, desire instruction from the Word of God, and follow His will. If you are in need of this invitation, it is yours. Please come as we stand and as we sing.